So welcome, good evening. We are very happy to welcome so many people to today's artist talk. Sylvie Liska from the Friends of Secession is not here. That's why I have the great honor to introduce our speakers today. This is artist talk takes place on the occasion of the exhibition What the Owl Knows by the Otolith Group. We welcome Anjalika, Sagar and Kodwo Eshun from the Otolith Group and Richard Couzins, the conversation partner. The Otolith Group was founded in 2002 by Anjalika and Kodwo. For 20 years now, they produce groundbreaking work in many different media. They address fundamental questions in relation to global politics, the long shadow of past events, the history and effects of colonialism, neocolonialism, often using science fiction as a tool. As a science fiction of the present, as they call it. I really shortened now the list of topics dramatically. Today at the session, the new moving image work, What the Owl Knows, premieres, something that really fills us with pride. Thank you very much, Kodwo and Anjalika, for really doing this massive effort and producing this new beautiful work for us. We're really very honored. For this work, they collaborated with their friend, painter and writer Lynette Yadom Boachi. It also shows the attention the Otolith Group pays to both the visual and the sonic qualities in their work. That's where today's conversation partner comes into play. Richard Couzins is a longtime friend and collaborator of the Otolith Group. He was already involved in their very first film with the title The Otolith from 2003. He is a researcher, writer, and practicing artist, making and exhibiting work both as a solo artist and collaboratively. His research interests include moving image, the human voice in artistic practice, song, photography in contemporary art, and the relationship between the avant-garde, early cinema, and music hall. His recent book, Voice as Art, From Theater to Forensics, is published by Routledge this year. At the end, I would like to thank the Friends of Secession and especially Sylvie Liska that they make this format possible, that we have these artist conversations. And I would like to inform you, but I think you all know it, that afterwards we open the exhibitions by Jean-Frédéric Schnieder and Patricia Boyd, and of course, the Otolith Group. So now I pass the word on to you. Thank you very much.
Who's going to start? Am I going to start? I'd just like to say, thank you for inviting me here today. As you just said, I first worked with Kodwo and Anjali on Otolith 1, the first work, and I shared the space of a microgravity flight near Russia on that occasion. But since then, the Otolith Group have made a huge body of work, and so it's a great pleasure to have this conversation now.
Thanks for joining us, Richard.
Thanks, Not at all, no. Yeah. But looking at the film, I think that it's constructed from overlapping yet opposing structures, like day and night, inside and outside. There's allegorical sequences using digital assets and indexical sound and image, sort of in contrast to that. And in the actual sound, the privileging of what might be noise, or thought to be noise, is also up against kind of highly theatrical speech. And so I think the allegory of the owl in Lynette's practice, in her painting and poetry, questions the formation of knowledge. So that's, it's tempting almost for me to say, what does the owl see with its big eyes? But it's not. It's what the owl knows. And what does the artist know? What do we know? And so, opening with this.
Yeah, thank you for that, Richard. I mean, it's strange because we can hear Lynette's voice. There's Lynette speaking right now. So she's a presence, a vocal presence with us. So, thank you for those thoughts. We have a tendency to take a moment from our work as a title which acts to initiate you into what we call the climate of fiction of the work. so that even when you don't know it, you are already approaching the world that we're trying to assemble. So what the owl knows comes from a moment in one of Lynette's poems. In fact, the very poem we can hear right now. And she says a line something like, the strength and endurance to know what the owl knows. And I think it's a question of poetics. You know, in a way, in this work, part of what interests us is to displace the biographical drive, the drive to know the life of the artist, to displace the kind of psychological drive to know the intention of the artist, like what is it that motivates Lynette? So we want to displace those two questions, and in their place, what we want to do is dramatize Lynette's poetry. So poetry stands where those other forms usually dominate. And so the question of what the owl knows is a recursive question. The question is how do we know what the owl knows about what the owl knows? So it's not so much that we're going to answer that question, but the question itself will be a kind of entrance into what Zadie Smith called the narrative mysteries that are entailed in Lynette's work. So, you know, I don't know how many people have seen the show so far, but when you enter, there are all these, we call them traveling elements, which have moved from the body of the video, and they greet you. They're like they're like invitations and initiations. They're welcoming you, and they are slightly distanced and slightly forbidding all at once. And you will encounter them later on. And so the owl is a figure that you will encounter many times. And in a way, the title is just welcoming you to a kind of owl's knowledge. I mean, we're fascinated by owls, you know, and Lynette shares that fascination. And so a lot of the work is about trying to find cross-media parallels between how Lynette approaches what she does and how we approach the kind of work we do.
It was in the kind of spirit of another work that we made on Etel Adnan. This kind of, and I suppose the work we did on Black Audio Film Collective or on Haroon Farocki, or, you know, our work curatorially and with other artists we've worked with, being they alive or dead, there is this, has always been this sense of wanting to kind of put a field of protection around them, instead of, you know, thinking of them as an object or as in relation to their value. And that is on kind of many different levels, you know. So with Lynette, you know, her work is about kind of an intervention into, scenes, like forces of mass, of light, of colour, of, you know, where these characters emerge from the painting surface. Black men and women and children, black life, in different scenes. One thinks, I mean, Lynette's kind of more interested in Walter Sickert than she is with any other kind of contemporary painter. And, when we think about the concept of race and as it gains its force during the 19th century, this is where Lynette kind of intervenes into the turn of the century as well, into these worlds in Europe where clearly all the money all the kind of capital that was being gained through slavery also produced an absence of Black life, obviously. So she intervenes in this state of absence with this interiority. And I guess we wanted to protect this interiority in a way that thinks about how we looking at her work. So I guess there is this double optic going on, and also in relation to the sound.
Yes, I can't find the quote here. I've got it written down. Yes, you've said that but the idea of paying attention, and the film, the way it's shot, where we don't see the whole painting, we see close-ups of the painting, and this kind of construction withdraws some kind of the preordained idea of what Lynette should be doing as a painter, and that there's this quote from Denise Ferreira da Silva that she used this phrase anti-colonial aesthetic interaction, and that's what Lynette's doing in some ways. Would you speak about that, or is that?
Yeah, I think some of the most compelling moments in the work, and I apologize for all the people who haven't had a chance to see it yet. It's kind of amazing to see so many people ranged in front of us. But if you have a chance to see it, there are these moments when Lynette often steps back to look at her work, and her back fills the camera frame. And these moments of visual frustration, these moments where where Lynette blocks the camera's capacity to reveal and to reframe, these moments of thwarting and frustrating, these moments are very satisfying. These moments where our desire to gaze and watch and know and understand, when they're blocked and our gaze is returned to us, and these are, I would say these are part of what's going on. This would be one way of thinking through Denise Ferreira da Silva's account of what we can call an anti-colonial aesthetic intervention. Broadly, I'd say, the black figure, black figuration in the frame of Western painting is overdetermined by multiple forces, overdetermined by capitalism and slavery. And so what part of Lynette's project and part of why she's inspiring for us is that she has created a number of methods and processes for underdetermining the black figure in the frame of Western modernity as a cultural figure of painting, so that when you look at Lynette's painting, it's not clear where the characters are, it's not clear who they are, it's not clear when they are. It's nothing about them is overdetermined by predicates, by qualities, by attributes that can explain and situate them. So what Lynette, I think, part of what we think Lynette is working on is that she's worked out a way of suspending those forms of overdetermination which attempt to fix the black figure in the frame of the Western canvas. And this suspension is about generating contingency and conditionality and the unthought and the unknown. That's what Lynette's doing. And to do that inside of painting dedicated to and emerging from that tradition from Delacroix and Velázquez, that's quite an achievement for us. We find that inspiring because it helps us to think about what happens when we bring a camera to bear on that project of underdetermination. So, Lynette is not making portraits. As we all know, she's not painting from life. She has no models. She has no people who sit for her. She's compositing And so this underdetermination is an act of sheer mental determination and intervention. And so a lot of the project is to say, you know, what happens when we do what Brent Hayes Edward calls hear across media. What happens when we hear across painting? What happens when we approach video making through the lens of Lynette's painting? What happens when we approach video as if we can begin to undo the frame in the same way as Lynette is undoing the painting frame? That's the aspiration. You know, whether we succeed or not is not as important as the effort, you know, because that's, in a way, that's the political urgency for us of her work. And it inspires us to draw out a kind of a poetic salience, you know, how to make video salient when it confronts painting.
Yes, it's interesting. I think the sound as the piece moves on is very intense at the beginning. It's quite a dry brush, so you get this incredible kind of noise, which of course Lynette can't hear because she's wearing the earbuds. And then at the same time we hear what's going on outside, which is like a kind of overhearing of these mixtures of sounds. I was going to say something there, but I've gone off a tangent. No, but sorry, it will come back to me. But what I was going to say was that as the film goes on, it then it becomes more contemplative. In the second section, when she's stepping back more to look at the work, but then in the titles, it sort of the urgency returns strangely. So they aren't like a kind of margin or diminuendo at the end. They become suddenly activated like those brush marks at the beginning, I thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to go back quickly to the kind of earlier question in relation to Lynette's work to kind of abstract the kind of forms of desire and, representations. I think we share very much with her something that we've been doing and something I've been, something that kind of feels quite natural in a way to people like Kodwo and I, born in the time that we were born in a city like London. And I kind of, think of the aesthetics of disidentification with the kind of various categories, various extractive categories, be they being woman, be they being class, be they being black, be they being brown, be they, whatever it might be. I think in the hub of the city, because everyone is sort of, when people could live in London cheaply, we could all have we could have fights, arguments, we could dance, we could, we could go to clubs, we could live, And I think inside that kind of friction, there was no kind of search. Inside those convivial antagonisms, there was no search for any identity to kind of overwhelm any other identity. It was like these weren't the culture wars, of identity politics. At that time, there was a desire to coalitions, be they sonic coalitions or visual coalitions or collectives, bands, different movements. And when I think about the history of the left in a city that comes out of, a long history in Britain, it's all from collectives of groups of multi-ethnic people, forms of rebellion against different forces at different times. And I think, one doesn't know, I kind of want to talk about it because I think it's sort of, it does have a power to kind of put some words around what those aesthetics might be, because they're not resilient, they're actually a kind of resistant, revolutionary kind of force that one wants to be part of. you know. I think in terms of the sound, I mean, there is a lot to say about the sound because the brushstrokes are being made by another great revolutionary figure called Pat Thomas, who's a new music composer. He's in his 70s, originally from Trinidad, lives in Oxford, and he works with piano and prepared pianos. And for example, we wanted to think sonically if we were going to use music with musicians not from America, not African American music scene, but British music. So Pat Thomas's brushstrokes, works with the kind of ASMR aspects of the work where we mic'd the back of the canvas and the mixing desk as she paints. We wanted to heighten the relation to the microphone as a brush, the microphone and the brush. And then the brush of the drum strokes becomes another form of kind of touching and breathing life into these different forces.
The brushstrokes that we hear when Lynette's on the walk and she stops in the woods, it's as if it's funny as if they're like at the first they seem very direct and you can see the brush, but then those brushstrokes are like a memory, or are which brushstrokes are those? Do you think? Because it moves on, of course, and then you have other sounds over. She's painting towards the end. Things get switched up a lot in, I think, in terms of sound and image. That's switched up, moved around. Their relationship is played with a lot.
Sounds on the move. Sounds move, and sounds imply or invite what we call this hearing across media. Which in our case is a kind of sonic practice of image making. Like approaching images sonically and trying to think with the noise of an image and trying to think through what people call the acoustemology, an acoustic epistemology, a kind of amplified acoustic epistemology, an amplified way of knowing what an image is or could be or might be. When sounds start to travel, when you move them around, that capacity to activate a kind of sonic way of knowing, you're kind of amplifying that. You're heightening it, and you're kind of you're saying to people, don't read the sounds indexically. Listen to an indexical sound as it shape shifts and takes on another form. It moves towards the metaphorical, it moves towards the apostrophic. It just takes on, in a way, a certain kind of lyric noise, a certain kind of lyricism through the irritation of noise. So those are some of the things we want to activate, and hopefully, in a way, you might sense these things, They're kind of devices of sensitization. You're like, something's moved. Can I follow it? Can I go where it goes? And where is that? But it's okay to go with that because you're invited to go with it,
Yes, well, I certainly think that happens in the work for sure. And I remembered this quote from John Berger, that a still, soundless painting becomes a corridor connecting the moment it represents with the moment at which it is being viewed.
That's beautiful. Can you say that again?
Sorry, yes.
Slower and louder.
Yes, sorry.
I think everybody would appreciate that because it's a beautiful quote.
Right, okay, it is a still, soundless painting becomes a corridor connecting the moment it represents with the moment at which it is viewed, or I've paraphrased that. But I think that is interesting in terms of your work generally, and this work in particular, because I think your work's works with histories, revisions of histories, and connecting the present moment to the past in many ways. But specifically in this work, we've got the present moment of the painting in the ways we're saying, with a reconfigured listening and all these sounds that are going on, including what's going on outside the window, and these mixtures of sounds. Yeah, what you've just said.
I think it's a beautiful formulation, because Berger's notion of a still, soundless painting as a corridor, as a passage, to me suggests a certain kind of transsensorial capacity, a certain capacity to build a corridor from one sense to another, to link that which is still, which implies its antonym, that which is moving, to link that with soundlessness, which clearly heightens the sound of silenceness, the sound of soundlessness. So a corridor is a beautiful, image of articulation. Actually, it's what Berger does really well. It's a figure of thought, a denkbild, an image thought. And, like the owl is a denkbild. The owl is an image of thought, which haunts us from our days working with Chris Marker on the owl's legacy. I think many people are confounded and amused by owls, and I think throughout the video we attempt to populate the video with this sound world of owls and crows, ravens, field mice, larks, mostly generated through the vocal practice of an artist called Laurie Lichtenberg, whose practice is extended vocal technique. So she populates the video with shrieks and
Pigeon sounds like
yells and I mean, quite blood curdling in a way, and that's all really important, because you get this. It's this acousmatic world, which is giving it some kind of febrile quality, some kind of unseen world that is present. And I think it's Lynette, when Lynette writes, she often taps into that world, a world in which crows and pigeons observe humans behaving badly and comment on them from a distance, a world in which birds take on this kind of allegorical sense, like, because birds are beyond good and evil, they can look back at us, and they can watch us without judging, and they can watch humans as they inevitably engineer their own demise. That tends to happen in Lynette's work.
Yes.
I mean, the pigeon is also, a somewhat of a curmudgeonly, jealous, gaslighting Tory, who is like.
We started by modelling.
telling this.
Didn't we start by modelling the pigeon in the beginning on Ted Heath?
Yes.
So
we showed Laurie Lichtenberg various British politicians. Edward Heath.
She said, can we go from Ted Heath to Christopher Hitchens? That was our initial guide, and she got that straight away. So if you haven't seen it yet, in the middle of the video, there's a scene based on the Lynette story. It's a kind of argument, a kind of one-sided argument between a pigeon and an owl. And the pigeon is a pompous, inflated bird. That's why why Edward Heath came to mind, because he had that kind of big, that big thing he had in his neck, and the waffly Edward Heath style from the 70s. And then Christopher Hitchens, when he was old, also had this weird hanging neck thing,
He's being next
jowly
again.
neck thing, which gives the voice this kind of sound. So that's Laurie. She's giving the pigeon this kind of
It's called satire.
pompous, inflated, bulging sound.
Yes.
It's interesting how it builds, isn't it? Because to begin with, it's almost you're introduced to urban animals. There's a fox, there's some the dawn chorus, but then it suddenly builds and builds up to this crescendo at this point in the sort of fable and
Yeah, I mean, for those those people here who share the burden of being British, you'll remember Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected. Maybe you won't. It's like a series of macabre fairy tales, where people invite other people to dinner and then serve them somebody they've just murdered. That kind of macabre tale. And Lynette's tales are like that. It's like people doing malevolent and malefic things to each other. And they were always these creatures that just observe, So, but in this case, the pigeon tries to bring the owl down to size, but the owl has its eyes on the prize, which is the field mouse. And there's a way in which clearly the owl is Lynette. The owl is Lynette because Lynette is an artist whose concentration and whose focus on her work is second to none. Nothing blocks her project and her practice, and it's in a way Zadie Smith has this interpretation of this fable in which the pigeon is Lynette's art student friends telling her to stop painting, and who does she think she is to be a painter? Who do you think you are to compare yourself to? Sickert and Velasquez, you're just an artist like the rest of us. So the pigeon stands for the jealous and begrudging art student, and the owl stands for Lynette. And so that's one way of that's one interpretation. The other interpretation which we like is that because the pigeon is the engineer of its own demise, i.e. the owl flies down to get the meal and then kills the pigeon stone dead.
By mistake.
Yeah, so the pigeon has gone in its own way. The pigeon has engineered its own death. The pigeon is, to use a phrase, hoist by its own petard. And that is a fable of Britishness. That is Britain since 2016, right? Britain is the engineer of its own demise. And where it's suffering from that engineered demise.
I thought about there's this image of crows on the football pitches, goal mouths, and these black crows, and that seems to be have a kind of incongruity, as well as being obviously they're just there. On the other hand, they're parallel worlds, football and crows, and it seemed to fit with the fact that crucial to Lynette's practice is both painting and poetry, and there's that Lessing's thesis about the difference between painting and poetry, isn't there? That whatever painting is space and poetry is temporal, and I wondered if that and obviously that's with the moving image that changes, and in this film it's almost like they are a bit like opposites, fire and ice, the poetry and the painting, yet they totally come together. And you can, they're equal in her work or something, or they come together, yet they don't come together.
Well, the paintings are, the hand and the eye and is creating these masses, these forces of colour and light, and but then her words, and we've always worked with the voice, with vocality from day one. I used to do the voiceovers. I mean, I'm doing a bit with her in this work, but we've always worked with poetics, and as our friend Denise Ferreira de Silva might call it, poethics, which is the poetical is a concept that she. It's a complex concept, as are all Denise's ideas. But the temporal, I can see, the temporal is true, because you can switch constantly with the poetry, and the poetry is kind of condensations of images, if you like, kind of, and other forces. So we asked her to, rather than filming her in a studio, and Lynette has always wanted to be in one of our works. I mean, she's somewhat of an actress, I think. She enjoys, that's a kind of hidden talent that she has, maybe. But she always, I think, wanted to sort of be in one of our works. Maybe not as Lynette, but doing something. But in this, she was very much herself. And I was surprised in the studio that she got the voiceover, the voice intonation, and everything so fast. That was, because it takes some time, to have that kind of voice, and to have a voice which also allows for the grain of the voice to kind of emerge. She. That's why we filmed her walking at night in parks, also because the poems were part of a series of poems called Plans for the Night, which we like because we like the idea of undergrounds. So the sense of her kind of producing these thought spaces as she walks in a kind of rhythmic form was something we tried, and we felt it worked.
Yeah, I think one way of thinking about it is to say, Lynette often says she paints what she can't write, and she writes what she can't paint. But you could think of video as staging a kind of conversation between painting and poetry through a kind of choreography. And then you get these kinds of connections and disconnections that you're talking about. You get these kind of asymptotic motions where the poetry seems to run alongside the poem. The poetry seems to run alongside painting without directly commenting on it, like a commentary from a distance, but not a direct commentary. So you can create all kinds of apostrophic moments in which poetry seems to call out to painting, but in its own terms, and painting seems to invite poetic descriptions. And video, for us, is a kind of medium of convocation. Video is something that brings other art forms together. That's what video is. That's part of why we do it. There's an inherent sociality to it. And we spend a lot of time staging kind of encounters between Etel Adnan, a poet who was simultaneously a painter, or Julius Eastman, a composer who was a pianist, who was an organist, who was...
And a vocalist.
Yeah, and a vocalist. And so we spend a lot of time working out how to make these encounters spark each other and generate some kind of intimacy without collapsing them onto each other, like holding onto their singularity but insisting on their relationality. That's the videographic project, and the key is to change the scale at which you do that for each project.
Yes. So you do. There very much is that similarity, as you said there, with these artists you've worked with, particularly Lynette, and because you're working with image, text and voice, etc. Yeah, and I suppose the second half, the poetry is more in the day, isn't it? And the nights to begin with, that changes. And there's a moment after the first passage of the painting where, as you said at the beginning, where the image is obstructed by the body coming in and out, folks, almost as if so we can reconsider what our gaze means. But then before the poetry comes in, there's this moment where she steps back, and you do get the sideways shots of her an advantage of her looking back at the painting.
Yeah.
What's that passage?
Yeah, because when video makers, no matter how small the crew are, video makers and filmmakers, they always promise that they'll only be in your space for an hour or two. When people say, "Can I film in your apartment? Can I film in your street? Can I film in your seminar room?" And they're like, "It's only going to be an hour or two." Of course, you don't believe them because they'll take all afternoon and they'll rearrange everything. So that's that kind of colonizing, territorializing impulse. Even at the smallest level of video, there's just this desire to reconstruct a world around itself. And that's exactly what we decided and imposed on ourselves not to do. So Lynette has a studio in East London. She's been there since 2005. She's never let anybody film there, ever, in 17 years. So if we're going in there, we're not going to change anything. We're not going to go in there like the BBC or the New York Times or the New York or any of these bozos and start rearranging everything and occupying Lynette's world. That's ridiculous. And so we're not going to do it.
And ask her about where her mum and dad are from.
Yes, we're not going to do it. So instead, you go into Lynette's space and you take it as it is. And so what that means is Lynette has piles of stuff here and there because it's her world and it's private to her. It's not ours, it's hers. We're intruding. So that meant there's a lot of awkward scenes where we're squeezed up against the constraints of her studio space. So a lot of those scenes where Lynette steps back and observes the canvas, that's like a very small perimeter of it's a very small frame we have to move in. So the camera is extremely constrained and contained. And part of the art is accepting those constraints and even, in a way, letting them direct your actions. So instead of imposing your direction on a studio space, you let the studio constraints direct what is possible and what is not. So these sideways shots are a key example of that. We're very inspired, like many artists, by Straub and Willey, and when they make the Chronicle of Anna Magdalena Bach, they're going into Bach's house, of course, which is made before cameras. So you get these extremely awkward shots where they're filming Gustav Lienhardt at his clavichord and he's playing away. And it's extremely awkward corner shots. Those kinds of shots tell you that the camera, the camera which is used to dominating and revealing with this huge zoom lens, this always used to a kind of panoptical capacity to reveal everything. It's the other way around. It's like, no, Lynette's space, Lynette's terms are going to start dictating a lot of what the camera frame can see, so that you feel a kind of spatial pressure, which is a kind of pulse running through the work, which you pick up after a while, and that's heightened because we work with a brilliant editor like Marika, who's sensitive to that, isn't she? This kind of spatial pressure and time pressure as the camera is squeezed into certain frames. And Kate, our DP.
Both women.
Yeah, Kate, our director of photography, is she's a kind of choreographer as well. So she can work inside these spaces, but they're awkward and deliberately so.
I mean, Kodwo talked about the studio, yes. I mean, the amount of fashion labels that want a piece of black artists are amazing. The amount of interest there is by Gucci, or the pressure that Lynette has been put under, not only Lynette, but many other emerging young black artists through the kind of various different art world whatever. The amount of pressure, that they are put under to kind of produce this sort of, remedial quality for capitalism, for the industry is horrendous. So, I mean, Lynette has really refused all that crap, which we are also very proud of, you know.
Absolutely.
And therefore, you know, for her to kind of, I mean, it's quite a thing, you know. We were in there for like 4 days, like 8 hours a day, doing all these different, it's not a big studio, like Koja says. And she really kept her composure, you know. It wasn't like, oh, have you got that bit right? No. She was like we stopped for lunch, an hour, ate, she went back into it. And we had to be totally silent, sensitive to the sounds that were being made by all these delivery drivers and all these, and the brush and all these kind of interruptions and, you know, all these worlds we wanted them to kind of exude. So we just had to sit there like quietly. But I was amazed by the interiority she even produces within herself while we are watching her. There was a kind of strength in her that I found, as a friend, I have found her to be a strong friend. Like, as a friend, she's a good friend, she's a strong friend. She's not an extractive friend, there's nothing like that going on, it's just friendship. And so I was proud to see her, because she's, you know, a bit younger than us, and we've known her since the beginning, really. But I'm proud to see that she's kept her composure in this kind of horrible world.
Bettina's giving us the nod, the 5-minute nod.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that you said she doesn't make portraits, but neither is this a portrait in a way, which I like that, you know. That.
Absolutely. I think she left the world of portraiture behind a long time ago, and in a way she sets a trap for recognition, identification. You know, it's possible to work with realistic effects for non-realistic outcomes. And that's kind of what she's doing, I think. And certainly in our project, she wasn't painting for the camera, she was painting in spite of the camera. She wasn't painting for us, she wasn't showing off, or, you know, because she's mastered painting, to use a masculine term, but she's not, you know, her main objective is not us, and that's quite humbling, actually, and it's actually also inspiring, because of course, you know, while we're doing this work and while she's doing her work, you know, Britain is going to hell in the proverbial handcart, you know, and so all the things that we keep out of the frame, all the things that Lynette keeps out in order to do her work,
Comes in at the end.
they all come crashing back in sonically in the closing credit sequence. So then, in a way, it's a timeline of the production process, and clearly it's a timeline of a system in a certain kind of capitalist decay, a certain system only capable of generating multiple crises, and only capable of continually immiserating the British public. And so all of that starts to flood back in.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
I think we have time for a few questions or responses. There's the lady there.
Karen, at the beginning, talking about some of the other subjects you took as a start for work, and I'm curious to see what difference or similarities in approach, process, intention between this film and, let's say, pieces with Adel Adnan or Haroon Farhi.
Teil der Ausstellung project is really similar. It was filmed in her apartment in Paris, except of course Etel being in her late 80s.
90s. She was 90.
Yeah,
something.
even so, of course Etel could only read for maybe 2 hours a day, so we would be there for 5 hours. Maybe another similarity is that Attell reads a poem, but the video that emerges is not a document of a poem. On the contrary, it's a poem reconstructed according to the requirements of video. So it's a video poem that doesn't exist in any book. Similarly, Lynette's paintings, in a way, we are decomposing the compositional process, trying to thwart the kind of the triumphant narrative arc where you see the big reveal of the finished work, and in a way, trying to continually show the scales of abstraction. Every painter knows this sense of weighing the paint, like the forces of gravity and color, in the fields of paint, the regions, the districts, the zones, the junctions, the borders. Every painter understands how putting color together changes the weight and the feeling and the mass and the motion of that canvas. And in a way, that's what we wanted to do. We always say that the work is not so much about making Lynette the object of attention. What we wanted to do was make her attention the object of our attention, and then invite the audience to pay attention to how we pay attention to how she pays attention. So what we wanted to do was create this kind of these three levels of attention and create a kind of third order video, a recursive video in which you gain this awareness of what it is you're being invited into. And I think that was there in earlier works, but here it's heightened. Thank you for that. That's a really good question. Thank you.
Sorry, it's more of a thank you very much as well, but more of a comment, which is when you talk about the sort of, I guess, the sort of dialogue between all these different gazes, it really makes me think of like an ars poetica, or a poem where you write about writing a poem, but I'm struck so much by the force in the scenes where she's painting, that's actually what's I feel most left with, is her physical, like not the physical force, but the sort of intention, and and then to end with I guess the sort of, as you put it, the decay, or I feel that the force comes through, even though we're left with that sort of sonic, I don't know, composition of what she is not hearing, but also what she is riling against. Yeah. And I felt it was such a great moment to turn it around on itself and put it back in and bring it out somewhere else. I don't know. So thank you very much. It was really great.
Thank you. Boris.
I have a question. I know your work for a while. So, and the whole the darkness, the knowledge which comes after everything ends, and in Judaism a bit evil even, and blackness and uncanny. But you are always so gentle. So someone can call it, poetics, but you're always gentle in negativity, in a protest. So can you tell me something more about this? Like you're gentle, like you being gentle. Like why?
It's playing the British at their own game.
No,
I mean,
I think you.
It's an old strategy.
I don't know.
It's been going on for years.
Isn't it something like ontological, like also knowing you like people also?
Yeah, it's become ontological.
I think we're extremely sensitive to the burden of transgression, or the expectation of transgression, the presupposition of transgression that artists of color are expected to play in the theater of cultural practice. We see it all around us, and we ourselves are continually tempted by it, as are all artists of color. And the gentleness that you talk about is a certain kind of oblique strategy that we've developed for managing expectations and presuppositions, which we think of as traps. We have to spring those traps which are designed by predators who have observed our behavior and who have created a lethal parody of our actions and qualities and attributes. Just as a hunter sets a trap for a rabbit by studying the appetites of a rabbit and creates a lethal portrait of a rabbit that will catch the rabbit and kill it. So our gentleness is in the knowledge of those traps. Let's say it's a gentleness in the shadow of predation.
But I also think that Britain is a very literary place for, has been a literary home for this kind of writing by Black and Asian writers for like 200 years. So, I think the loudness of the written form, also is kind of very much present, or the challenge coming out of that history in relation to how we begin to sonify the complexity of that kind of quietude, that quiet loudness. So many writers, who have written about their experiences, Dambutsa Marcher, whose quote we have in the installation, people like Hanif Qureshi and many, many others. So, maybe I think that's also probably part of our formation.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we really have to continue with the opening. So, I ask all of you, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for this beautiful